Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about this panel, Navigating Climate Disclosure Standards for Sustainable Impact. I want to thank WGEO for their tremendous leadership and this amazing programming that they've put together. And I'm excited because I understand that good data for both GHG emissions and sustainability impacts is a critical foundation for building the kind of transparency and data information we need to build the climate economy, to inform climate action. And so today we have a tremendous opportunity to hear from those on the cutting edge of developing this global infrastructure. I'm Catherine Atkin. I'm an attorney in California. My area of focus is climate data policy. I work at the Stanford Law School. And so I am really excited to hear what they have to say. In California, we've been doing our part to create the fabric of disclosure globally. We last year signed into law 2 new disclosure laws in California, had a chance to write the bill and work on that for the past 4 years. So I really looked towards the global environment we all did in California to see how to do this in a way that actually brings us together, reduces drag on the corporates. And so I'm excited to hear both from the standard setters here in the room as well as the financial services sector. So we have 3 great speakers. Ms. Marty McBrien is the Chief of Strategic Affairs and Capacity Building for the IFRS Foundation. Mr. Arsalan Montafar is the head of JP Morgan's Development Finance Institution. And Mr. Eddie Ijaz Vasquez is member of GRI's supervisory body and a fellow of the Brookings Institute. So I'm excited to have you all here. Let's get started. The sort of landscape for disclosure is changing. We know we've moved from a voluntary paradigm to a mandatory regime globally. You all have been part of that, are reacting to that. I'd love to just start out by hearing from you, like what's happening right now? How do you think the ecosystem is evolving? And each of you are playing a different role in that. So maybe starting with Marty, I mean, you at the IFRS have just come out with new standards, which is tremendously important globally that we bring together jurisdictions as they begin this journey of sustainability. So could you talk about what that experience has been like? What have you learned in the first 18 months?
Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you very much for having us and organising such a fantastic event here. I mean, this is truly a really important topic and one that's been on everyone's lips all week. So really great to start the day like this. So this week, Climate Finance Day was our 3rd birthday at the ISSB. So we were born 3 years ago on Climate Finance Day at COP. And I'm pretty sure that how tired I look this morning is because we have run non-stop for 3 years to get here. And that is really based on our mandate, which was to as fast as we could, harmonise the reporting landscape and get our first 2 standards, our general requirements, our S1, if you like, the how-to standard, the how-to report standard on all sustainability information, risks and opportunities, as well as our climate standard, which was very much built off the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure recommendations. And with a bit of standard set of secret sauce sprinkled on top so that it could be assured and, could stack up properly, a framework, proper standard, if you like. And so it's been really busy, and progress towards adoption has been much quicker than we actually thought. I think we thought we'd have to work a lot harder to persuade everyone to come with us. Our sister board, IASB, is mandatory in over 145 jurisdictions around the world. And so I guess we had a good foundation, a good running start to build off, if you like. We are now working in jurisdictions in over 30 jurisdictions, I should say. If you want to count countries, that's well over 60 if you include the EU. We're bringing them in. And I had great conversations with the finance ministry here this week in Azerbaijan, who are looking to take steps to bring these standards in the not too distant future. So the momentum is continuing to go, and great feedback from the investor community that these are, what they're looking for to get them that decision useful information, and great feedback from governments that are starting to take that journey.
Well, fantastic. I mean, it was amazing to see the number of jurisdictions that are in process have already approved the adoption of the standard. That's fantastic. Well, Edie, can you talk a little bit about GRI? Because you've been in the space for a long time. You're sort of, the grandmother and grandfathers of reporting, and it's terrific to see, I'm sure for you to see the foundation that was laid that has led to some of these changes, and also to see the throughput for the GRI standard in much of what's happening. So could you talk about what you're seeing right now and a little bit of the history of GRI?
Absolutely. Look, and very pleased to be here. Thank you to WGO for inviting us. And great to be here with JP Morgan and IFRS because, in a way, this is a platform of partnerships to really move forward into that direction. And as you said, GRI has been around for 28 years and is one of the largest standards that has been commonly used for a long, long time into this process. And we're now very excited on the climate front because the structure of the GRI standards is that we have the general ones, but then we work with either sectors, industries in that process, or in specific topics to really get deeper into what makes more sense, into what do you really want to analyze to figure out what are the impacts on nature, on society, on people. And therefore, these comprehensive standards allow not only to get the company a diagnostic, but also to compare across. And now on the climate side, we're very excited. We have been working on 18 months, and these standards are really built out of a very multi-stakeholder process. So it's not just investors and the companies, but it's also civil society, labor unions, specialists in that process, academia. Because at the end, when we want to come up with the standards, it really needs to serve the needs of all of these communities. So, for example, on the climate side, we have been working for 18 months, and we're now about to issue, coming April, if everything goes well, our updated climate standard. We're very excited because there are a few things that are new. It's not only the emission side and the impact on that process, but it's also looking at just transition to be able to say from the labor perspective, what is it that is happening and what are your plans? It looks at adaptation because all of these companies need to start saying, look, these are the impacts that are happening on us. How are we setting up the process and how do we report and tell all of our stakeholders this is where we're going? Carbon credits is going to be an integral part so that the reporting on the carbon credits and on the elimination of GSG is transparently presented in that process. So it brings, I think, a lot of the topics that you hear around in this COP in discussion in a very structured manner that is very developed on multi-stakeholders and very complementary to what IFRS is working to this process so that we have complementary perspectives and a lot of work on the interoperability so that the burden of collecting data and reporting is as minimized as possible. Because the easier it is, then the more people can jump in on the pod.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're going to dive into this, sort of the work you all have been doing and what that's looking like for corporates. But Arsalan, could you talk as a financial services organization, how are you as a financial services organization experiencing this landscape? How are portfolio companies experiencing it? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. So for ourselves, as well as our clients, CSRD right now is on the top of the agenda. It is presenting a lot of challenges and opportunities. On the opportunity side is the fact that everyone has a lot of focus on this. That brings a lot of momentum to it, right? The challenges that still remain is that, first of all, a lot of the companies, they just don't have yet the data infrastructure set up to be able to do the reporting that is necessary, especially when you go into scope 3 and their sustainability throughout their supply chain. That is very difficult, especially for financial institutions where a lot of their sustainability reporting will be through the companies that they finance. That is very, very challenging. Even when you need to maybe get data from vendors, external vendors, there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of inconsistencies. So there's a lot of challenges there. There's also challenges when that we see that there's corporate sustainability reporting is being sometimes coming under regulations of multiple jurisdictions, often in different ways, and that's creating a little bit of a divergence in the sustainability reporting requirements. That's why the work of the ISSB is critical, and the harmonization that they're bringing is very important. And I think the phased rollout of that, and the 30 jurisdictions plus that have already done this, that's fantastic. And as that phased rollout continues, we hope that that will bring more harmonization, more consistency, and we hope that also Eddie, to your point, more resources are become available to companies to make it easier to do so that they can comply with these requirements.
Thank you, and it is good to mention that we don't have the EU, sort of the EFRAG, which is the group that created the standard for which those companies subject to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU are using, but that's an important part of this puzzle as well, and we can maybe talk a little bit about the alignment that you're seeing there, because those are the companies that are first reporting, as you said. So well, thank you for that. And let's with that actually dive into this question of we're hearing a little bit of the continued kind of alphabet soup of different standards, and but what I've really been heartened by is the extent to which there's a lot of overlap. The Venn diagram is actually quite tight, but at the same time you still need to do work together to create these concordances. Could you talk about the ISSB and GRI and the work that you've done together?
Absolutely, and to say that I helped set up the ISSB, so I came from one of the standards boards that moved it in, and one of the first actions I was asked to do by the new chairman after the merger was, could I get an MOU secured with GRI? And I think it was the fastest MOU I've ever seen in my entire career, having been part of the corporate reporting dialogue with all the standard setters for years. It was the fastest thing we've ever possibly secured because it just made sense for everyone, and it really became. Everyone, I often have to answer what framework, what standard do I use? There's so many out there. It's really simple. It's ISSB for your investors and GRI for everything else, and it's a combination that works really well together. And I don't think there should be any other real noise in the system. We should really all be working together towards achieving that as we go forward. So at Climate Week this year in London, we sort of updated that collaboration, and we didn't change the MOU, but we updated what we were going to do about it and how we were going to continue to work together more. And we've committed to jointly identifying and aligning our common disclosures that address information needs under the distinct scopes and purposes of both our standards. Us obviously being, as I said, investors, and GRI investors, but much wider set of stakeholders for both our thematic standards, so climate, as well as our sector-based standard setting processes, which are ongoing at the moment. We also agreed on a joint work focused on identifying relevant GRI requirements relating to the ISSB research projects the board are currently undertaking on biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services, including requirements from GRIs 303, 306, and 101 standards, as well as GRI 11, 12, 13, and 14 for those of you that are in the gritty of the standard. And I know people actually love that stuff.
She's like, you've exceeded my nerdiness.
People love the nerdy bit too. You can't go without, right? And as well as considering the requirements that are relevant to investor information needs that we have, and therefore could be used in our future standard setting work that might be adapted for use either from GRI already or for ours in the ISSB standard setting context. So we're also working to consider what just common disclosures the ISSB and GRI could do together, and how we can deliver that as part of full interoperability. We've got a lot going on. I'm going to keep going. We've also given all of the interrelated aspects of work around our nature and our human capital work with GRI. We'll be considering that sort of as a whole, and sort of joint work to cover the new specific disclosures that GRI might need as it develops its sector work further, and how we could support alignment with the industry-based work and enhancements that SASB are doing, but also with Europe together. And also committing to transparency to the market in terms of telling what we're doing, because it's one thing for us to be working behind in the background, but everyone's like, oh, what are you doing with GRI? What are you doing? What are you doing? Are you working together? So yeah, we talk to each other like every single day, probably about 5 times to 6 times the staff actually talk to each other, if not more. This is the leadership meet all the time. I walked through reception of Canary Wharf, where the IFRS Foundation's head office is, the other day, and I stumbled over Emmanuel Faber and Carol Adams, and I didn't even know they were there. These guys are meeting and talking together all the time about how we can move this forward. And finally, but not least, on our specific climate-related financial disclosures, which are really key as we move forward, we've published our analysis and mapping and developed a key resource that really illustrates the areas of overlap and interoperability against scope 1, 2, and 3 in greenhouse gas emissions, and in accordance with both GRI's standard 305 on emissions, but also directly with our S2 standard, climate standards. So, as I said at the beginning, this isn't an or, this is an and equation when you talk about us, and we really need to start, embedding that language right across the world.
Oof, Okay, that
That's
is
a lot.
amazing.
Over to someone who might be less intense.
No, we need that. And if you want to talk about from your perspective, kind of, and maybe also just unpack a little bit about maybe the scope of ISSB's, sort of data points, versus GRI, and then then I want to ask each of you. So, what does this mean for a company? Like, when they're subject to ISSB, and then they also are doing GRI, like, wow, when they're in the room all together, the staff is trying to like fill out these forms. What's happening?
No, and I think, okay, I don't have anything else to add. You said everything. Many thanks. But look, strategically, here's the question, right? Um, the analogy that I use is like, okay, so I have my financial information at the household, and there are certain things that I need to report to the tax authority or to the bank when I'm going to for a loan. But in order to decide my budget allocations, how much for vacation, what is it gonna save, and what's gonna go for children's education, all that, I need a system that more stakeholders are going to be involved. The information is the same at the core. You need to collect the same bank information and the income and all that kind of process, but the stakeholders that are going to be looking at this reporting are different. So, in a way, companies, to be able to move in the sustainability journey, okay, require really a substantive number of information. Okay, and that is what you were mentioning, Arsalan, that process of compiling the information and be able to internalize and use it for themselves to get better in that process. Okay. Now, then you have overlays of the trick is how to use that same data for different kinds of reporting because different people will be interested in different things in that process. So when I'm talking about just transition, look, communities and civil society and labor unions are going to be really interested on how companies are getting serious about the just transition in that process. That may not be of greater interest to an immediate investor that is making choices in that process. It may be interesting to investors that are looking at the longer term, 10 years down the road, how is this company moving in that direction? So the main message to companies is that we need to, and we're working really hard to make sure that the way that things are accounted, scope one, scope two, scope three, is the same. These kind of things are easy. We work with EFRAC in similar ways because at the end, it's really helping companies. It's not just the reporting. The reporting is a tool. Remember that reporting is just a step in the journey, a way to really get more sustainability into that process. So that's part of the message, and Marty was really describing in detail the practical things, the weekly meetings that are taking place, but it's really we can't lose the objective that at the end it's really that journey to sustainability, is really that journey of climate action, not only in the mitigation side but also in the adaptation side.
Arsalan, do you want to react to that? And what are you seeing in terms of I mean, you talked about CSRD being sort of this, you know, a big piece of work for people right now. How do you think about GRI and ISSB and how people are going to manage this?
Yeah.
What's your
Well, another just complication to first add into the
yeah?
situation is when you also have global companies that are operating across multiple jurisdictions, right? Like as a financial institution that serves hundreds of thousands of clients across 160 plus countries, this is a very, very difficult issue for us. And ideally, we'd like to have all that information harmonized in the same place in the same way. The worst case scenario is you have to do 160
Right.
different reports for 160 different jurisdictions. So hopefully we can get to the ideal scenario as sooner the better. But one reaction I had, maybe Eddie, to one of your points is that this information has different audiences, right? But it's often the same sort of information. And so, how do you make it more practical for everyone? I think um, one is to make sure you're always under the principles of making sure that what you're doing is based on materiality, it's based on relevance, it's based on practicality, usability. So those principles are always incorporated in when choosing how to leverage these different standards and then use it for your reporting. I think the second is that I hope we leverage some of the technologies of the 21st century in doing so, and we're not just like doing things on pen and paper, and we're not just uploading PDF reports for then people to read through hundreds of pages. And we leverage AI, we leverage digital platforms for digitizing this information, which then allows for the users of this information information to be able to search and filter it for their specific need when they're going through it, based on whether they're a regulator, based on whether they're an investor, based on what other stakeholder they might be. And then the last point I want to mention is, I think, around the point about that, reporting is obviously very important, but it's just transparent into actually your journey. But if you really want to accelerate the journey, you need incentives, right? And those incentives come from different places. They come from government policy and regulations, and there's both carrots and sticks to, incentivize companies to go on their sustainability journey. It comes from investors, investors that are like-minded, that have the same sort of sustainability criteria to reward the companies that have the intentions to have positive impact and commit to accountability um, against those intentions, to be again rewarded with capital that will support them on that journey. So these type of incentives, the more that we can build, I think the more successful all of these initiatives could be.
Well, those are some great points, and I want a follow up on technology because I do think, at the end of the day, we don't have one global world order. We're not going to have one, standard for everybody. But that's where technology, and I am a devotee of like digital tagging, and I know XBRL is an approach to tagging data so that it's, findable. And when you say scope three, category one, it's the same wherever you make that report. So where do you think we are in that technology journey right now? I mean, I'm, in Silicon Valley, and I know that there's a lot of innovation and probably just a little bit of churn right now where you get a lot of solutions, but we're going to get there. What do you think that timeline looks like? And, Marty and Eddie, what are you thinking about in terms of the other drivers for kind of ease of the standard implementation?
So maybe I'll start and
Yeah,
pass
yeah,
it to
yeah.
Marty and Eddie. So I think we're pretty much at that pivotal moment for a few reasons. One is that you first need the common language, and I think the standards that are that the ISSB and GRI have put out provide that common language. There's also a task force that JP Morgan has been working on to provide also common language for development impact measurement reporting. Builds on kind of sustainability reporting as the kind of foundation, but then it's an additional building block for development impact reporting. These common languages are critical, and they're now coming into place. You also have the fact that now you really have generative AI, you have kind of these advanced technologies that are able to, you feed them the common language and the patterns that they need to be picking up so they could go scan existing information and then be able to already pre-populate maybe a lot of these reports with these common definitions, but then also identify to companies where is the places that are missing, what are the gaps, so that they can focus on, building those gaps. But the last point I'll mention is that uh, these are collective action problems, and so they have to be solved in a collective way, in an open source way, in a public goods way. But also, public goods are always, you have the problem of kind of the tragedy of the commons and the free rider problem that it's like, well, you go do it and I'll use it. So hopefully, but there, in places like COP, you see that there's a lot of like-minded people that come together, and hopefully there's enough of a coalition of people that are willing to help build these technologies to get them off the ground.
Before you turn it over, I did have on my list of questions for you to talk a little bit about that impact framework and sort of how you see frameworks like that kind of connecting to and driving this ecosystem. So if you'd like to share, because it sounds like this is cutting edge work that is going to support the financial services industry to, work in this space
Yeah, so
effectively.
the objective of this task force that we launched about in April 2023, it consists of about 80 financial institutions and capital market stakeholders, both on the buy side, asset manager, sell side, investment banks, as well as development banks were part of it. The ISSB was an observer, the International Capital Markets Association was an observer, UN agencies were there as well. Was to broaden the sustainable finance market, because today in the capital markets, climate finance, fortunately, uh, thanks to a lot of good work of people, here on the stage and as well as in this conference, has now a definition: financing that promotes climate mitigation and climate adaptation. development finance in the capital markets didn't really have a definition, right? But it's, they always thought it's only things that what development banks do, but it's ultimately what it really means is any financing that has development impact. So we had to have a kind of capital markets definitions of what development impact is, how it's measured, how it should be reported, not recreating the wheel, because there's already so many great work that has already been done, but how do you navigate existing standards from ISSB, from GRI, to identify the metrics that speak to the intentionality that a company has for incremental development impact tailored to their specific jurisdictions and the development gaps and the context that they're operating in, and set up an accountability mechanism for reporting against those development impact objectives. And then very quickly, not just making that a theoretical thing, but then how do we operationalize that? So very quickly think about, okay, how do we now digitize that information, put it in a platform, put independent verification around it, have that independent verification become criteria for inclusion in certain benchmark indices, investable indices. So ultimately, it becomes easier for an investor who cares about development impact to identify opportunities that promote development impact and have transparency and accountability against the development impact, and move capital to where it's needed most. So that work just got published 2 weeks ago during the IMF annual meetings on ICMA's website. You could see it. It's called the Impact Disclosure Guidance. And now we're pursuing the next steps. We're building that digital platform and the other ancillary services to scale it up and operationalize it.
Well, that is really exciting. Everybody up on this platform is doing real things, new things, and it's exciting to see the synergy. And Eddie, if you wanted to just, it's obviously got to be music to your ears that
Absolutely.
he's talking about, larger social impact and how do we create markets for that. So, if you want,
Precisely because that connects, and coming back to the question on the technology,
yeah.
what we see many companies that are in the GRI ecosystem is struggling on what does that mean? How do I translate the operational data that I have into this data? And we are extremely hopeful that a lot of the generative AI that is coming is going to begin to help these companies. Is that transition? Is that dictionary? Is that way of understanding, okay, I'm the operational manager of this plant. God, what is these kind of things in that process? So I think I see that as a fundamental change in the landscape that is going to happen over the next couple of years. I'm very hopeful. The second, what we see is that the sectoral discussion, the sectoral roundtables, allow for very rapid transfer and comparison of what is it that you're doing and what is it that you're doing. Because when we began looking and developing the one on mining, it just allowed the whole ecosystem to begin to flourish in that process and to move really, really fast to say, this is what it means. This is what it comes into that process. And then it becomes much easier to talk to investors because then the translation from the day-to-day mine operation to the reality of what is it that is to happen, that translation, that compilation, that processing actually, I think technology is going to be an important part, but it's also the technology to share that information and share to those dialogues that process. And on the development side, we're very excited because, again, when we are moving on the climate standard, just transition issues and adaptation issues and engagement with the communities around that in all that process becomes a really integral part of the sustainability angle so that it is not just climate standards are just mitigation, but how do you translate to the realities of your operation in that process? So,
Thank you. Marty, anything to add to that?
No, not at all. I mean, I think one of the key things for us around the whole interoperability conversation that you kind of alluded to was, obviously not working very closely with GRI, working very closely with ESRSs to make sure we were as interoperable as possible. I hate that word. We should just be exactly the same, but for now we're interoperable. But also in publishing our own digital taxonomies quite quickly after the standards, we committed to digital first, and that's very close to my heart. I chaired the first XBRL working group on climate change in 2012. Can you believe it?
You're not old enough to have done
Yeah,
that.
I know. You're very kind. You're very kind. But this is sort of an area of digital. I think its time has come, right? And we've got a couple of years to nail it, get it right, and we missed the boat here. And this whole digital tagging piece, I think, is going to be so important in the interoperability piece, because we talked about all the jurisdictions around the world and your 160 challenge. We are hoping this baseline of ISSB standards, this passport, if you will, and using Emmanuel's language, that helps people work in all these countries, disclose and report in all these countries in a consistent, comparable, decision useful way. If we can digitally tag this as well, helps with our interoperability even more with GRI, with other standards such as Europe. If we can get all of that mapped, it's really going to help reduce the burden, drive a lot more efficiency for business, but also capital markets.
Fantastic. Well, I want to talk a little bit. Let's. I've heard you each say in your own way. Like disclosure is just the beginning, right? And let's not say it's a very fundamental beginning, and getting it done is not easy work. But what is it? What is your vision for what it unlocks? What would you like to see happening? The next say 3 to 5 years. What do we unlock in terms of impact with this disclosure that we're working hard to implement well? And you're obviously talking about capital markets, decarbonization, climate action. What just your thoughts?
I can be really, yeah, I'll be really quick on this, because I think we need to start to see evidence that good disclosure, because really disclosure, as we've said, is just the story you're telling to the market, right? What's really important, if we're going to talk about mitigation adaptation, is the action people are doing, that they're telling through our standards to the world. Now, our standards can help in prompt a bit of action, but what we want really is for this to become business as usual, right? So we're not having to talk about individual disclosures quite like we do now, right? It just becomes like our accounting standards. They're part of business. You just pick them up and you do it. You know what they are, and you just kind of roll with it, right? But what I would personally, this is an IFRS Foundation message, but we spend a lot of time saying that good quality disclosure is going to finance, move money to the global south. That transparency is going to really move the money and help this transition. And if I had one wish list, it would be that we've got some really good evidence, and not just one example, but hundreds of examples in the next 3 years. You said, didn't you? Has to be in the next 3 years. We've got hundreds of examples of good quality disclosure using GRI and ISSB helps to move money to the global south to help finance this transition. That would be number one on my wish list, Catherine.
All right.
Well, building on that, the moving money piece is that I think for us it is to create development impact as an asset class. And what does that mean? If I go today to my wealth advisor and say, hey, I'm looking at my retirement fund and I want to move, 30% of my portfolio to support financial inclusion. They're going to look at me as like, what the hell are you talking about? Right? And I was like, well, could you put something in nature and biodiversity? They're like, what do you think we are, right? And the reason is that because there isn't yet the piping in the financial system that can connect investors, like even a retail investor like me that might walk into my, a branch, to opportunities in the global south that produce those impacts. And a fundamental component of that piping is this common language, is then that transparency on that information. Then it could be productized. Then it could be offered to investors of all sorts, institutional uh, and retail. So my dream would be in a few years when I go and I have that conversation, they don't look at me very strangely.
No, 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 because today you can come and say, look, I want to invest in electric vehicle sector. Yeah, okay, no problem, right here. It is in that process of I want biodiversity positive investment. Not yet. But okay, I'll complement on dreams. I think that a reporting that begins to allow companies, and I'm telling, look, it's the operational guys out there making choices, to understand that making good for the environment, the first few steps are not as difficult as they look. When they look at these issues of transition plans, just transition with the labor, and issues of climate adaptation, it is like a NASA language. Nobody understands what it is. And hopefully, this standard and reporting at the basic begin to realize, oh no, actually, it's not that complicated. I haven't thought of this one and on these changes in that process, and I can reduce these impacts by doing this. And then begin to share with the stakeholders, not only investors, but with society at large and with the government to say, look, this is what we're doing, that process. Once you begin that journey, you begin also to realize that the following steps may be more difficult. And therefore, that prioritization to begin to say, okay, all right, we've done the easy ones. Where do we move to the next ones? And you can do that with a really good data collection, compilation, analysis, and reporting. And that's where the rewards mechanisms begin. And that's when the first mover and the leaders begin to say, oh, these guys are way ahead of the game. Finally, the reporting and one of the challenges that are happening is on um, commitments. And the commitments say, this is where we're going. And reporting and allowing many of those commitments are just in the excitement of the COP. Somebody said we're going to achieve this, but without the basis to understand that process. So reporting, I think, is going to help us become better at making promises, making targets, and understand the, how to uh, set up those targets so that they're not too easy and not too difficult, but they're a stretch target. You can't do that without a really good basis of data compilation, data monitoring, choices, reporting.
Okay, we've all expressed kind of our dream state, which is not a dream state, it's where we're going to be. Um, so, what's your, like, if you had one thing that you think either you or yourself as a standard setter or as the private sector, I mean, it can be like what I need to do and what they need to do. What is like the most important thing that you think that has to happen that maybe you're not sure is going to happen? I mean, you talked about making commitments and actually working towards them, but what would the go forward agenda be? Do we feel like there's enough engagement between the private sector, stakeholders and standard setters? Have we done that? Like, what's
Um, so, what is the this? I think two thoughts. One is that especially in the private markets, for this to work, you definitely need the demand side, and the demand side here being from the investors, right? The good thing is that we actually, despite what you're hearing about ESG backlash and whatnot, um, the when you look into more impact focused investing and sustainability strategies, which are more nuanced and they're not trying to just weight their portfolio against like a amorphous ESG score and they're looking more at like outputs and outcomes. That demand continues to grow. Um, we at JP Morgan believe that that demand is a mega trend that supersedes any sort of hiccups and bumps that we might be experiencing across the journey, because it's just shifting demographics, and it's more public awareness about the issues that the globe is facing and the importance of about how to address them. Um, that said, we think that, or at least by hypothesis, that that demand is latent, and can be unleashed if you had more product and supply to provide them. Um, but that waits to be seen, and I think there needs to be more global campaigns to increase awareness and continue to ensure people care to put their money in places that not only have returns, because the good thing is that a lot of this can be done commercially, so you could get returns. It's not talking about, oh, we need to increase philanthropy. No, it's just like we need more conscious investment of some non-financial criteria also being incorporated in investment decisions, and people being able to care about that. And a lot of people do care. Maybe they don't have the literacy, right? That this is something that you should be having a conversation with your wealth advisor um, about investing in line with your purposes and values. So um, that is something I'd like to see more collaboration around promoting. I'm not sure if that will happen, but that requires, maybe from public sources, which it's hard to, rely on, but even in the kind of uh, private and kind of international institution segment, if there's more collaboration around it, could be very positive.
thank you, Marty?
I'm going to take a slightly different one here. I'm going to say we have a massive skills challenge on our hands here. Um, and I just look at our hosts' members. They've got 46 members in Africa. And a challenge I think about every day when I get up, I look after capacity building for the ISSB. How am I going to get everyone up to speed with what we need to do across the world, right? And I know we've had 20 plus years of voluntary disclosure, some parts mandatory, but largely voluntary. How am I going to upskill 125,000 chartered accountants across Africa? So these are the ones that will be the CFOs. They will be on the boards. They will be very senior in the finance teams. They will be the auditors. They will be the key people in supporting this transition, if you like, across Africa. That's a challenge that I'm dealing with right now, and I could pick any series of countries. I've just picked that continent because of the membership here. But like, if you think about that, there's 125,000 practicing right now. How do we make sure they're future fit to be engaging in these conversations in the next 5 years, at the latest next 5 years, right? And doing this in everyday business. And we're not just doing this, you could pick it for any of the main professions, the legal profession. How are we going to get sustainability professionals, the ones that have got us here today, to understand the language of risk and return? How are we going to move them across to start, really engaging with the finance functions and working together? This is a huge challenge for all of us that we all have to lean into. And people say to me, oh, Marty, I go out and I train regulators right around the world all the time on sustainability and our standards, but much broader. And I have to start wherever people are at. And often I am starting with, what is climate? What is climate risk? What does that look like in a market? What does it even look like in your day to day? What is scope 1, 2, and 3? And we all have to take the time. 4 of us here are veterans at this, right? But we all have to take the time with everyone and answer their questions, big or small, because this is going to be the next really, we might have set all the standards up perfectly and have them all perfectly interoperable and have the impact investing piece there. But if we haven't built the skills in the businesses, in the governments, in the place in the investment community to have those conversations, then we're just not going to land this in the time period that we need to.
Great point. Eddie?
No, I couldn't agree more with that. You took number one and number two. So I'll go to number three, which is board members. I think that for them, there's this sense of this is important. They're reading off, and yeah, this is a trend. But what does it mean in terms of really decisions and pushing the companies that they oversee and really connecting what may be the day-to-day financial numbers, but also the long-term sustainability and comparative advantage? That translation from this is what we hear in the COP to what is it that we need to start doing in 2025, that's something that keeps me awake at night.
Okay, well, those are a great agenda for us and things to keep track of. And I just want to say one of the things that always amazes me about COP is just the quality of the people that are just walking around here and doing these programs. It's just fantastic, and I love that there's synergies, a lot of synergy here, and a lot of innovation. I don't know if we have time to ask a few questions. Yes? Should I? Can I ask the audience? Yeah. Okay. We have time for a question or two. Anybody want to ask our esteemed panelists a question? Yeah. Go ahead.
My name is Hongbo, and come from Shenzhen, China, so the Silicon Valley of the renewable energies. So we are doing something very simple. Did that work? Oh, is that better? Oh, okay. So I'm Hongbo. I'm come from Shenzhen. Um, and we are doing something very simple. We create a digital platform which is called OpenGo that prove green screen. We are doing three things. First thing, we create a digital twins for the renewable energy asset to check the whole life cycle of the clean energy from its production to consumption along the way. Number two, we get proof validation that we are fully compliant with IU 100. And number three, we pre-integrate all the solar panel the manufacturers from China, so we provide out-of-box solutions. Actually, I'm going to have a panel outside here on the 12 o'clock, so feel free to come if you have time. So I'm more than happy to share our experience, and our product is very mature and ready for the mass deployment globally.
Yeah. Anybody want to say anything? I was in Shenzhen a couple months ago, and it's amazing to hear the range of just innovation and like deployment at scale, and that's on the regulatory side and on the actual like solution implementation side. So great to hear that. Anybody have anything they'd like to add in response?
No, just again, great to hear that and to see that you're putting a lot of these ideas into action. I think one of the things in China that I have learned about is that though a little bit of that materiality assessment that is important in these standards is still lacking, and I think you know. Uh, the platform that you're creating might be an opportunity to show any sort of inconsistencies with kind of the Chinese frameworks and these global standards and press for them. Um, yeah, so, but that's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. One more question.
Yeah.
You have a loud voice. Go ahead. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. I'm Tom McHenry from Mona College, U.S. A lot of familiarity with disclosure standards in California, particularly. We've not been so successful nationally, but I'm wondering at a global level whether you think there is are there global mechanisms for disclosure. CBAM out of the EU would be one example of that, but are you seeing trends in sort of global disclosure standards that would be actual and enforceable and realistic? And I'm sorry if you already covered that.
No, very happy to cover that one. We are seeing trends, and that's also played out across California, I think, very much as well. So we have, from an investor focus point of view, so reporting in your annual account equivalent Mindstream reporting package, we have the International Sustainability Standards Board's two standards that have now, and I repeated it earlier, but we've got 30 jurisdictions or 60 countries, including the EU, which covers over 50% of global GDP and 50% of global emissions. So really starting to make good progress there, and more supply coming on every day, much faster than we hoped. We're trying to hit our target of 145, which is where our accounting standards are currently in play, and that covers the investor piece. And Eddie, why don't you cover the other piece of the puzzle?
Absolutely, and the GRI standards have been in operation for 28 years, and close to 80% of the Fortune 500 use the GRI standards, and they're voluntary, but they are really allow for that comparability moving forward across in that process, and very focused on the impacts on the environment, on society, and the like. But has been a long history and a lot of companies across 120 countries that are using that in that process. So those are two very practical examples to your answer.
Well, thank you. We could keep talking about this. I know people have other places they need to go, but I just want to thank, on behalf of WGEO and myself personally, it's been great to meet you and hear about your work. And so let's thank our panelists.